Hey, good morning guys, I'm the Tech Prepper, hope you're all doing well. We're going to kick off a new series called Get Ready Now, and it was inspired by a fail I had when I went to go grab one of my backup HTs, and it was not fully programmed. And the goal of this series is to get myself personally ready today. I don't want to delay things for 3 months, 6 months, a year thinking I have more time, and my hope is that what I talk about here will inspire you guys to go ahead and start to take action now. So let's start out by defining some objectives because everybody's needs are going to be different. Now I have a couple of different needs. Number one, I want this to be set up so that I have local communication in my area. Number two, I want to use it as an information gathering tool to get things like news, weather, traffic, and a few other things. I also want interoperability if needed with other radio services. I'm an amateur radio operator, so I want to be able to interoperate with FRS, GMRS, MURS, and a few others if needed in an emergency. And lastly, I want to have a standard mechanism whereby I can program my different sets of radios. I have about 3 different types of Yaesu radios here with varying degrees of capabilities, as well as my first radio, which was a Baofeng UV5R, which is fairly limited. So I wanted an approach whereby I can get these to work together as consistently as possible, and I've come up with an approach which I hope is useful to you. In terms of this video, there are too many radios, too many pieces of software for programming them. We're not going to get into this. This is really going to be a high-level discussion of how I go about finding what's out there, starting with an inventory of what capabilities are available in my local county, in my state, in my region, and in the US, and just making a large list. We're going to go through that list in a second. Number two, how do we prioritize and select from that list what really should be programmed? How do we group them? How do we label them? And really just talk about all of those pieces. So the intent here is I'm going to focus more on how I set things up for my area in the Phoenix area, along with the different types of buckets like fire, police, and some of the other services. Hopefully you guys can draw from that inspiration and build your own set of frequency lists. So we're going to take a look at a couple of different sources for information on how to find these frequencies. The first, since I'm an amateur operator, is Repeater Book. There is a great app and also a desktop application which will show you all of the repeaters in your area. And on that note, we want to make sure that today's exercise is focused only on AM and FM reception for analog radio. Number two, there's another site that we're going to look at called radioreference.com, and this has a large set of frequencies, too many to actually program, so I'll show you how I whittle those down. Third is doing an online search. So for example, I want to understand what is the band plan for Arizona. I'll just go into Google and type in Arizona band plan, and typically it will help you or help me find the allocations for my area for the different amateur radio bands. There's also a number of what they call FOGs or Field Operation Guides. This one is the National Interoperability Field Operations Guide put out by Homeland Security, and it actually has all of the frequencies for basically all of the radio services that would be used in just about any situation, specifically during an emergency, and how you should program your radios so that you can interoperate with as many services. This is a print field manual, but there is a PDF available online. I'll put a link down to that below in the description. Oh, one more thing. The other one is experience. So I've been doing this not terribly long, so I think coming up on about 3.5 years. And just by listening to local traffic, listening to local repeaters, being looped into that community, I also have found some other frequencies that are not easily found. So experience is definitely another source that I've drawn from. So in terms of software, we have a lot of different options. I typically use Chirp, or if available, I'll use RT Systems. That is a commercial product. Either way, we're not going to get into that. What we want to do instead is I want to share with you my Excel spreadsheet that I put together. I'm going to share this with the folks on Buy Me a Coffee as a thank you. And really, we're going to walk through all of the different categorizations of stuff that I programmed specifically for my needs in this area. You'll need to make some adjustments. And the way that I like to do it is, number one, prioritization. I start with ordering the frequencies that I use most. And typically they are repeaters, and they are repeaters that give me the broadest range. And I don't program everything. Like I said, I program the stuff that I use 99% of the time. And this is why when dealing with repeaters, I'm a big fan of learning to program from the front panel your repeaters. And if you can't remember that, what I typically also do is I'll have a number of these cheat sheets. They are business card size laminated reference system that I put together, and we'll do a future video on this. So in the field, if I forget to program any one of these radios, I will just pull out the card and I'll consult the repeater book app and be able to enter a frequency manually. So what you're seeing on the screen here is really just 7 repeaters, and I've ordered them in slots like 1 through 10. I've reserved 10 spaces, and I don't want to go crazy. That's one of the things to keep in mind with the series, is that I want to be sensible and practical. Yeah, there are probably 200 repeaters in my area, but realistically, I'm not going to use more than 10, maybe 20. So I've ordered them 1 through 7. And in our area, it's kind of nice. We have a linked repeater system called Metrolink, and it pretty much gives us probably about 100-mile radius, depending on which you are, across portions of Arizona. And again, these ones were just based on my personal needs. And some of the things I'll do is, in terms of the labeling here, you'll notice that I'm confining myself to just 6 characters, and to make things easy for myself, I'm actually just using the locations of where they are. So Daisy, Shaw Butte, Air Park, Mount Ord, Usury Pass, Mingus Mountain, things like that. So for me, they let me know pretty much where it is, and I don't have to figure it out. And then I've included the frequency, the PO tone, and the offset if needed. Now, the great thing about this spreadsheet is that I can also print it out. Now, I know people will say, well, you know what, repeaters in an emergency can fail, but honestly, a lot of them have backup power and will either run on a combination of generator and solar and battery. But again, if that happens, we just move to another mode of operation. So just the fact that a repeater can fail is no reason not to include it in the plan. Let's move on to our second bucket. So I'm an amateur radio operator, so the 2-meter band is a workhorse band for these handheld radios. All 4 of these radios support it. And like before, I want to have consecutive numbers. So I start on 11 and I go past 20. So I'm trying to always start like on that 1, 11, 21, 31, 41 boundary, so that depending on if there's a gap, because this radio can pick up a lot more or can be programmed with a lot more frequencies, whereas the bow fan cannot, it gives me the ability to always know that 31 on this radio will be the same as 31 on this radio. There's some limitations based on available memories on each radio, but that's a topic we might get into a little bit later. So for a 2-meter band, I like to bring in the nationwide calling frequencies. These are frequencies that are generally established frequencies that allow us to pretty much be guaranteed anywhere you move around the US. That will be a frequency where if you program it and throw out your call sign and someone hears it, you typically will have some activity. And I always will label these basically by band, so 2M dash and then number 1. So that's my first calling frequency. Now I mentioned there are state-specific band plans. So in Google, I will enter in Arizona band plan, and I've kind of already done that here on Google. We'll go ahead and look at the 2-meter band, and we have a listing here of all of the different bands, and it actually includes multiple frequency sections allocated for simplex use, so without a repeater, kind of radio to radio. So what I've done here is I've also wanted to have like a secondary and a tertiary simplex frequency, because sometimes the calling frequencies that are used nationwide get a little crowded. So I just call this one 2M-2 and 2M-3. This next one here is kind of interesting. So it's not for full operational security, but there's something known as working split mode, and that's where you will transmit on one frequency and the other station will receive it on another, and vice versa. So if anybody is monitoring that one frequency, they only hear one half of the conversation. So for my group and I, occasionally we'll operate what we call split. And to make things simple, I'll have one called 2M-H1, stands for 2 meters, home 1. So if I'm at the operating location or my house, I will put my first radio in that position. and it has one frequency for transmitting and another for receiving. Just below that, I'll have 2M F1, 2 meter field 1, and it's the reverse of that. So you go out into the field, you put it in that one, and that allows me to easily transmit on one side, receive on the other, and have a little bit of operational security, even though it's all in the clear. So anything we can do to mitigate things is actually quite nice. These next two frequencies, Soda and Adventure, they are local watering hole frequencies for people that like to do summits on the air or take their gear to go in the backcountry. The Adventure frequency actually is established nationwide, so I really do encourage everybody to program that. The Soda frequency is probably only really specific to the state of Arizona, so it gives me the ability to interoperate with other operators that might be in the backcountry like myself. The remaining frequencies are digital frequencies. I do like to interface these with my computer, so I have a handful. So we've got APRS. I've done many videos on this in the past. There's also in our area, WinLink and bulletin board system. So I'll call that like 2M-PKT. So you can see here that the labels are very descriptive. And then again, by consulting the band plan, I know for a fact that there is a set of frequencies that are allocated for generic digital use. So I've just picked two of them. So I've picked 145.500 and 145.600, and I've designated those as 2M Dig 1 and 2M Dig 2. And then these are all grouped together in a bank or a group called 2M for 2 meters. So hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of an idea of how I selected what goes into here. There is obviously a larger list of frequencies for the 2 meter band, but these are the ones that I use 99% of the time. Okay, we're gonna speed things up a little bit. The next up is the 70 centimeter band, or 440 megahertz. Again, another amateur radio band, usually found on these HTs, and don't want to go too much in depth other than the convention. So again, we have a nationwide calling frequency. It's always designated as the band and then the number 1 as the calling frequency. So 70 CM-1, and then I've also picked up a couple of other simplex frequencies called 2 and 3. And then there's also a APRS on 440 that our state uses. Again, this list can grow. Now, this next area is covering the 1.25 centimeter band, or 220 megahertz. And the reason why I like this band is that most radios don't support this. So a little bit of operational security. So my Baofeng UV5R really does not work on 220 megahertz, but these two radios do. This is the Yaesu VX6 and the Yaesu VX8DR. I have interoperability between these two, and if I run low power, chances are fairly low that other people are going to eavesdrop. So I've spent more time on this one. There is a nationwide calling frequency. I've called this bank, given that I have a 6-character restriction, 222-1 for the calling, and then I've gone and carved out a bunch of the different simplex frequencies. I do plan on doing the split mode in the future, but for right now, I've just enumerated a few of those. And then just like before, I've got APRS and then 2 different digital frequencies. Again, I consulted the Arizona band plan for the 1.25 centimeter band. So let's quickly look at the 6 meter band. Most people don't use 6 meter FM, which is another area of a little bit more operational security or chance that you're not going to be eavesdropped on. So just like before, I've got 2 simplex frequencies following our convention, 6M1 for calling, 6M2 for being a backup simplex frequency, and then I've got 1 for packet. And again, these start at numbers 41, and I have room to go all the way to 50 if needed, and then they're both grouped in a memory called 6M. So this pretty much takes it for the amateur radio stuff. Since I have quad band capable radios, that's the reason why I have 4 buckets for those sets of amateur radio bands. All right, so those are all the bands that I'm legally able to transmit with my technician class license here in the US. I told you that this was going to be a information gathering device, so the next bucket is I'll put a series of AM and FM broadcast stations. And again, the nice thing about the Yaesu VX6 is that it actually supports both of those. So I can put basically the same types of news stations you would normally get in your vehicle. I bucketed these ones as FM 1, 2, as many FM stations as I want, and then AM 1, 2. I only have 4 because really I'm only interested in these 4 stations. So we'll just take a quick listen here. So FM 1, and I forget what station this is. It's on the spreadsheet. Get a little bit of music, but this one has news, and then also AM. Now for the AM broadcast, I typically have to be outside or use a different antenna. I may show that later, but I've got a disc cone antenna, which is a very wideband receive antenna, and actually does pretty good for listening to a lot of this stuff. So again, these are all bucketed by AM, or broadcast, I think is what I called it. But the point is, put the frequencies that you will actually use that are applicable to your area. In general, I try not to get too hung up on which side of the fence they lean politically, because really I'm typically only interested in not so much the normal talk broadcasts, but really just the news segments if there was an emergency and we did not have ability to get a news source any other way other than through radio. So this next section is getting time. I enjoy operating in the field, and sometimes the software that I run requires good timing, and I don't always have GPS or the ability to sync my time. I've had really good success by listening to some shortwave stations in the US. There are 2, WWV and WWM, and they sit on kind of lower HF. So for example, we've got the station on 2.5 megahertz, 5 megahertz, 10 megahertz is usually the one I use, 15, 20, and 25, and they will actually announce the time using a atomic clock. So if I need to get down fairly close, it actually does work for me to listen to it and then hit the configuration to set the time on my computer. And again, these only really work on radios like the VX6 and the VX8 that will actually pick up AM broadcast station kind of in that lower HF range. Not for everybody, but again, for me, I use this a lot. I probably use it about once a week when I'm in the field to manually set my clock. So that time isn't for everybody, but weather is, and the great thing is that there is something called the NOAA Weather Radio Service, and I have those labeled as NOAA-1 through 7. Now these are frequencies that you can pick up on narrow FM across the entire United States, and it has 24 hours of broadcast listening for your local weather. So this is actually in my memory as I think WX, for example, so that I can go and just quickly get to the weather. And all 4 of these radios support NOAA weather broadcast. And I would say in an emergency, especially if you're in an area where you have inclement weather, this one is a must-have and probably should move further up on the list.
The National Weather Service in Phoenix has issued a flash flood warning for Gila County in east central Arizona, Maricopa County in south central Arizona.
All right, next up, I talked about this before, and it's the MURS radio service, the multi-use radio service. I've done videos on this in the past, but this is typically what my wife and I use because it is does not require a license. The nice thing about MURS is that it's typically more quiet in terms of traffic when compared to things like FRS and GMRS that are more popular. There are only 5 frequencies. The cool thing about this is that you can remove the antenna. I forgot which Redivis model this was, the RV21. I'll put a link down below. But most of my radios that have the MURS cap mod, not completely legal or not legal to transmit on, will actually interoperate with these radios. So in an emergency, if I need to, I can actually transmit on the MURS frequencies. And just like before, standard convention, I've started with a memory offset of 81, and it ends at 85. There aren't any more, but I want to be as consistent as possible. And then I have labeled them MURS-1 through 5. So let's go on to the next one is the 22 FRS/GMRS. I do have a couple of those radios, but I do like to program them on my amateur radios as well. Again, not completely legal to do, but since I have the MURS cap mod that allows me to transmit outside of the amateur radio bands, in emergency, if I had to, I can interoperate with all of the 22 FRS and GMRS bands. And these are also in a separate memory groups. The cool thing about putting things in memory groups like this is that I can put them in a bank and just scan all of the GMRS stations. And I typically will do this when I take the Jeep out 4x-wheel or 4x4ing, mostly because most of the Jeep groups have standardized on GMRS instead of CB for their mode of communication. So if I had to raise somebody, it's the easiest way for me to get a hold of somebody. All right, so the next set of frequencies are mostly for scanning and information gathering, and these are primarily sourced from radioreference.com. Now, I wanted the ability to monitor local fire traffic. Now, in a lot of areas, municipalities have switched over to P25 or digital trunk systems, and the challenge there is that you're no longer easily able to listen with these radios. You actually need specialized scanners or specialized software and hardware to do it. In our area, at least the fire department is still on FM analog, which is great. So I put the different fire frequencies on here. Now there is a long list on radioreference.com, and like I said, I didn't want to go crazy putting everything in, so I really wanted the stuff that was in my area. So as you can see here, I went with Department of Public Safety, D5, 13, 14, and 18. I kind of skipped everything else, and the way that I did that is I spent about 3 days where I basically put everything in and listened and basically didn't put stuff in that I couldn't hear. And I also consulted the labels. So since I'm in the Phoenix area, actually I did this first. Since I'm in the Phoenix area, I decided to get the Central Valley, East Valley, West Valley, South Valley, and that's how I kind of whittled it down. But that technique of listening to a large set and kind of waiting for traffic over the course of several days is a technique I also used for some of these groups. So the fire is kind of cool. I'm not exactly sure if I'm allowed to record it for you guys, but let's give it a quick, maybe 5-second listen.
Engine 277, fire channel A7, fire alarm indication, 44, West Night Lane.
So again, for me, I consulted radioreference.com, and I wanted to get more of the Department of Public Service in, and in our case, our highway patrol has not moved over to those P25 systems yet, and is still FM narrowband, and I'm able to pick up a few of the highway patrol frequencies. So statewide operations, and then I also brought in channel 4 and 5. Again, this was based on just some listening over time. They have a large laundry list, and like I said, I want to keep things simple, and this gives me just really quickly the ability to potentially catch a traffic accident that may have happened in my area. So moving down, this one was actually sourced from the NIFOG, the National Interoperability Field Operations Guide, and it was for search and rescue. Since I do a lot of backpacking, I want to be able to have a frequency where if I had to transmit out of band using the MURS cap mod on this radio, I could do that. So I basically pulled in all of the search and rescue frequencies. Now I haven't heard any traffic on these yet, which makes sense, but in an emergency, I wanted to have every single one of them. A couple of other cool things here. This one, it's debatable whether it's a tool or a toy. Most of my radios will support listening airband, so I can listen to all of the air traffic coming into Sky Harbor International Airport. So they have a long list, but I went ahead and whittled them down to things like the North Tower, the South Tower, and some of the ground communication. And with my disc cone antenna that's mounted on the roof, I can actually swap out this antenna and connect it to this feed line, and I can actually listen to all of air traffic control. And then really guys, the last one here is something I'm experimenting with. I've been doing some searches, and I knew that we had a, what do we call it here? Arizona Rangers, and it is a collaboration between private citizens and the Sheriff's Department to provide mutual support, and they actually have a set of frequencies allocated. Again, I just typed in Arizona Rangers frequencies, and then it actually dumped me into radioreference.com. It was an area I didn't see before, and I went ahead and programmed all of those. And again, just to drive it home, I was very consistent on how I labeled everything. And in an emergency, I plan to scan those banks. So in a nutshell, guys, I know that this was a long video, but my thought process here was, one, figure out what is most important to you in terms of receiving information. Is it news? Is it traffic? Is it weather? Is it broadcast news? Is it amateur radio bands? Once you do that, prioritize those in order and start to allocate sets of frequencies with some gaps. I'd like to start on a 1 boundary and end on like a 10 boundary. So I would start on 1, 11, 21, 31, 41, etc. Then I would label those using a 6-character naming convention that was very consistent and allowed me to recognize very quickly by looking at it, yeah, if it is 2M1 or 70 centimeter 1, it means it's a national calling frequency. Then grouping those together in different bands is a really good way to allow for ease of scanning. Also on the scanning note, there are some frequencies here like the Fire 1 frequency and the NOAA weather broadcast that pretty much transmit continuously. So in my software, I will typically opt to skip that scanning because it'll always stop there. So just a little tip that I found. One thing on limitations of radios, like I said, this radio is a tri-bander. This one is a quad bander with the MURS cap mod. Both of these can transmit outside of their designated or designed frequencies. This radio here is only a dual bander. It has limitations both on transmit and receive. So these two radios are the superset of everything we've covered. FT60 has a smaller set, probably about half of the stuff it can pick up and transmit on. And then the Baofeng UV5R is the most limited as a dual band transmitter and also as a limited receiver. But the other limitation you'll find with some of these radios is the number of memories. So again, this one has, I think, close to 900 memories. I've used only about 120 or so here. And the Baofeng UV5R has, like, I think 128 memory slots. You're also limited on banks. I have all the banks I need to put all of these buckets in on my Yaesu VX6. But for example, my FT60, I only have, I think, like 10 banks. So when you're looking for radios, honestly, I would look for a radio that probably has the widest receive coverage, that will cover all of the different radio services, all the way into AM, FM broadcast, down to shortwave listening, and gives you the ability to transmit on the most frequencies. And specifically, if you're able to implement the MURS mod to allow you to transmit outside in an emergency, I would go ahead and do that. Again, my pick, hands down, is the Yaesu VX6. I'll put a link to the full series I did probably sometime last year on that. Anyways, guys, I think I had a couple of other notes here. A couple things that I would also recommend you do. Again, learn to program your radios from the front panel. If you can't remember, make yourself a cheat card, put that in your wallet. I also recommend that for all of those references that you download, save them as a PDF file, like literally do print, save as PDF, and also print them out. So in the event that, for example, my computer is also toast and the internet is not available, I still have the ability to consult this, and I can look at a larger list of frequencies that I did not have in my original list. Oh, this was a long one, guys. Hopefully you'll appreciate and find something useful here. Where's my coffee? I'm the Tech Prepper. Be strong, be safe, and be prepared.